He forgot his wife's name, but remembered how her hand felt in winter. Some nights, he wandered into the past like it was a room with no door. No one knew where he went until a dog showed them. Not just any dog, a dog who knew the way memory hides in the scent of things, and how to follow a man who lost everything, except one instinct left, to go home. Part 1, The Wrong Way Home. The first time James Wilder disappeared, they found his slippers floating in the koi pond and a pack of cheese crackers under the bird bath. The staff chalked it up to confusion and gently reinforced the memory care unit's security latch. The second time, he was gone all night. They found him at dawn, curled on a stranger's porch 5 miles away, arms wrapped around a matted dog with one torn ear and burrs in its fur. He would not let go, not of the dog, and not of the past. James had been at Magnolia Glen for just over 7 months. He arrived in the rain, clutching a single suitcase and wearing a corduroy coat that still smelled faintly of pipe smoke, though he had not smoked in years. His daughter, Carol Welder Hartley, stood beside him with reddened eyes and a stack of legal documents tucked beneath her arm. Magnolia Glen sat on the edge of Lexington, Kentucky, where suburbia blurred into horse pasture, and everything smelled faintly of sweet clover and mulch. It was not cheap, but Carol had chosen it because of the garden walkways, the therapy dog program, and the old oak tree that reminded her of home. James did not say much at first. He wandered. He squinted at photos. He asked for his wife, Nadine, and then forgot he had asked. But every so often, something would spark, like when they played Johnny Cash on Thursdays, or when someone peeled an orange nearby. He would sit straighter. He would murmur a name. Once, he recited the Pledge of Allegiance, hand over heart, eyes wet. The staff called these glimmers, but nothing glimmered brighter than the dog. No one knew where it had come from. A brindle mix, rangy and alert, with a keen gaze and a deep, weary bark, its right ear folded in half like it had been caught in a trap years ago and healed wrong. Its paws were dusty. It wore no collar. It simply appeared one morning in the field across from the main gates, staring toward the windows. It watched James, and James watched it back. Wilder, said Etta, the night shift nurse, during the 3rd week of September. Do you know that dog? James stared through the smudged window pane. He tapped the glass once. That is Gideon? Is that his name? She asked, scribbling it in her notes. James did not answer. His jaw tightened, and his thumb began to rub a pattern on the windowsill tight. Tiny circles that matched the edge of a brass coin he always kept in his pocket. A 1943 week penny. Carol once explained that Nadine had given him that coin during their first month of dating, to remind him that even the smallest thing can last. She would said it was bent slightly, rubbed smooth from decades of nervous fingers. They called it his anchor. The 4th time James wandered, it was different. He waited until just before twilight, when the common room grew dim and the day nurses prepared to clock out. He slipped past the laundry carts, through the hallway near the old piano, and out the rear garden gate, which had swollen in the heat and no longer latched properly. By the time anyone noticed, he was gone. So was the dog. Carol was frantic. She filed a silver alert. Police checked bus stations, gas stations, and local hospitals. Staff canvassed surrounding neighborhoods, handing out flyers that read, "Elderly man missing, may respond to James, please call immediately." He was missing for 3 nights. Then, early on the 4th morning, a call came in from a woman named Diane Pickering. She would found him sleeping in her shed near Ashland Avenue. not far from a pale blue bungalow with yellow shutters and a sagging porch. James had grown up in that house. He did not speak at first, just sat on the shed's edge, legs dangling, petting the dog's side in long, slow strokes. The animal was pressed close to him, muzzle against James's knee. When Diane offered him water, he blinked like he was coming back from underwater. He whispered, "Gideon." After that, the staff made a quiet decision. They let the dog stay. They took him to the vet, scanned for a chip, nothing. He was likely a stray, 4 or 5 years old, possibly part shepherd, part hound. His fur had once been glossy but was now dulled with time and hunger. One vet tech called him a loyal shadow. The name stuck. Shadow. They fed him, vaccinated him, added a collar with a small guest tag, an idea Carol insisted on, just in case James ever wandered again. "If that dog's gonna follow him," she said, "then at least we will know where they are." What no one expected was this. James began to speak again, not in full sentences, not every day. But when they walked together, James and Shadow memories came back. He talked about the color of the tomatoes in his mother's garden, about the way Nadine used to hum when she folded sheets, about the oak tree in front of his old house, and how the lightning had split it one summer and it still grew anyway. It was like the movement woke up a part of him that had been sleeping. Shadow always led, trotting ahead and then pausing at every fork, waiting for James to catch up. Sometimes they walked for 10 minutes, sometimes for an hour, and James remembered there was only one place James refused to go. The attic room on the west wing of Magnolia Glen, the one with the dark green wallpaper and the old bookshelf. It used to be a storage space, but now it served as a quiet reading nook for residents who could not handle the noise of the main library. James would not even cross the threshold. Shadow growled softly whenever they neared it. Etta noticed it first. "Wilder?" she asked gently one morning, as she helped him settle into his chair. "What is it about that room?" James stared past her. Then he whispered, "That is where the letter was." "What letter?" He did not answer, but he reached for his pocket and realized, with a sharp intake of breath, that his penny was gone. Part 2, The Wrong Way Home. The penny was not in his pocket. James Wilder patted again left side, then right, his fingers trembling slightly. He blinked down at his corduroy lap as though it had betrayed him. His breath came shorter, shallow. He stood up too fast and Shadow rose beside him. "Alert? I had it," James muttered. "It was right here." Etta stepped forward, trying not to alarm him. "Wilder, maybe it is in your nightstand, or dropped in the sheets this morning." He shook his head. "I felt it at breakfast." "I know I did." Shadow pressed his nose gently to James's knee, then turned, trotting toward the hallway like he understood exactly what was missing. Carol came in just after noon. She wore an oversized oak wildcat sweatshirt and had forgotten her earrings, something she only did when worried. The director had called her after James' panic attack. "I should be soon the coin into his pocket," she said quietly, crouching in the carpet with a flashlight. "He has always had it, ever since Mom gave it to him." They tore the room apart, checked under the bed, inside his shoes, even in the pillowcase. No luck. James sat silent for most of it, arms folded across his chest, staring at the baseboard heater like it might open a portal. He finally spoke. "It is in the room with the letter." Carol looked up. "What letter, Dad?" but James only scratched at a dry spot on his knuckle and said nothing more. That afternoon, Shadow refused to leave the west corridor. He planted himself at the entrance to the attic reading room and whined a low, uncertain sound that ended in a frustrated huff. Etta tried coaxing him with a biscuit. James stood behind her, watching the dog's ears twitch like antennae. "Is that where it went?" James asked. Shadow looked back at him. His tail thudded once. "I do not like that room." James added, voice barely audible, "It is heavy in there." Etta glanced at Carol, who had just arrived with a paper cup of vending machine coffee. "Do you want to go in wilder?" she asked. James hesitated, then nodded, slowly. The reading room had been converted from an old staff storage area, bare rafters above. A musty smell beneath the lavender oil they pumped through the vents. A rocking chair sat by the window, and a set of mismatched bookshelves lined the far wall. James stepped inside and stopped. His hand reached instinctively for his pocket, then closed on air. Shadow stood in the doorway, unwilling to cross the threshold. James turned in a slow circle, and then he said, clear as a bell, "That is where she told me she was leaving." Etta paused. "Who?" "James." "My sister. The last time we talked. This was her bedroom once. She stood by that window and told me she was moving out. Mama had just died. Daddy was already drinking too much. She said she was tired of the yelling." James' voice thickened. "She left a letter on the desk for me, told me to read it when I was ready." Carol's eyes went wide. "Dad, I did not know you had a sister." He blinked. "She was older. Ruth, born 41. Same year as the flood." Carol looked at Etta in quiet disbelief. James had not spoken that name in years. They did not find a letter, but they did find the coin tucked under a floorboard, just near the window frame. James dropped to his knees and pulled it out himself, holding it up to the afternoon light. It was warm in his palm. He held it to his chest and wept. "I left it here," he whispered. "When she left, I was so angry. I did not want anything that reminded me of her. I came up and put it in the floor crack and swore I would never speak her name again." He kissed the edge of the penny. "I forgot for 60 years. That evening, James insisted on walking the North Garden Trail. He had not wanted to go near it in weeks. It curved around the back of the property, past a row of pine trees and a wrought iron bench that overlooked a small retention pond. Shadow led the way, tail raised. "Did I ever tell you?" James said to Etta, who followed a few steps behind with Carol, "that Nadine said she loved me for the first time under those trees?" Carol answered softly, "You never did. She was 17. I was 18. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the ring, and it rolled straight into the water. Took me half an hour to fish it out with a stick." He smiled. "I thought I would remember that forever, but it's been gone from my head for so long. I thought maybe it never happened." He reached down and scratched Shadow's ear, but he knew where to go. The staff at Magnolia Glen started tracking James's progress, not by cognitive tests, but by the rote of his walks. When he wandered, they followed Shadow's tracker. When he slowed down, so did his speech. When he paused too long at the garden statue of St. Francis, they would know to bring water and a coat. The dog was not a therapy pet in the traditional sense. He did not respond to commands. He rarely barked, but he remembered where James went, what time he woke, which room upset him, which hallway brought calm. He guarded James's memories the way a shepherd guards a scattered flock patiently, repeatedly, without judgment. In early October, James began drawing again. He used to sketch when Carol was little doodles of horses and fences, baseball mitts and his wife's hands, but he had not picked up a pencil in years. Then one afternoon, he asked for a clipboard and a red Bic pen. His first drawing was of the dog, a simple line sketch. Long legs, folded ear, one bright eye looking back. He titled it, shakily, Shadow. The map? Carol cried when she saw it. Why that title? She asked. James smiled. Because I am not lost when I am with him. He knows where the past is buried. But the past was not done with him yet. On the first frost of November, Shadow did not come to the door. They searched the grounds, called into the wind, shook treats and jingled keys. No sign of him. James stood outside for an hour, coat unzipped, staring into the trees. He has gone to find her, he said finally. Gone to finish the letter. What letter, Dad? Carol asked gently. James reached into his pocket, where the coin was safely sewn in now. The one Ruth never got to send. Part 3, The Wrong Way Home. The sky hung low and grey. The morning shadow disappeared. The wind came in stiff from the northwest, scattering the last of the sweet gum leaves across the Magnolia Glen courtyard. By mid-morning, the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. James Wilder stood by the west-facing fence line, his hands trembling inside wool gloves. He had not spoken since breakfast. Not really. Only fragments. He left it too late, he would said. He has gone to fetch it. No one knew what it was. Not even Carol. Staff formed a search grid. Carol printed photos of the dog and handed them to local volunteers who sometimes walked the edge of the property. A staff member from the front desk checked the tracker. He is out of range, she said. Must we slip the collar or it broke? It had knelt by James' armchair that afternoon and showed him a photograph of Shadow on her phone. We will find him. Wilder, she said, voice gentle. James looked at the screen and squinted. That is not him. The bidder blinked. It is not. James shook his head. That is just what he looks like, but it is not him. She let it go. Carol, however, could not. That night she stayed late, sitting by the garden gate long after the other visitors had gone home. She brought an old jacket of her father's, the one with the faint pine tar smell from decades of barn chores, and laid it on the bench near the trees. I do not think you are just a dog, she whispered into the dusk. But if you are, come back anyway. She stayed until her fingers went numb. The next morning, James was no broken locks, no forced doors, just a single set of footprints leading away from the building toward the pasture beyond the trees. And beside them, faint but clear in the frost, another set, four-legged. They found him by the old railroad tracks near Russell Cave Road, nearly 6 miles from the home. He was sitting cross-legged on a stump, his coat buttoned crooked, one glove missing, and beside him, Shadow, fur damp from creek water, a thorn caught in his tail, tongue lolling out like he would run for hours, and was pleased with himself. Carol cried right there in the grass. James looked up at her and said, very softly, he remembered where she went. Carol knelt. Who? Dad. Ruth. He pulled something from his coat pocket. A folded piece of paper, water-stained and worn. The letter was short, just 6 lines, written in a flowing hand. James, I do not blame you. You had to stay and take care of him. I had to leave to save myself, but I never stopped being your sister. I hope you forgive me. Ruth. At the bottom, a date. August 17th, 1961. Carol turned it over. On the back was a drawing childlike, done in red ink, a dog with long legs and a folded ear. Her breath caught. Dad. Is this? He nodded. That is Gideon, the one we had when we were kids. She drew it for me before she left. Carol swallowed. But you said Shadow was Gideon. James' eyes did not waver. He is. After that, something in James shifted. He slept better, talked more. He remembered not just names and dates, but colors and smells and textures. How the kitchen smelled when Nadine made beef stew. The way Carol's baby blanket felt against his cheek the night she came home from the hospital. But only when he walked with Shadow. If the dog was not there. James drifted. If the dog was beside him, his mind opened like a window. He is like a tether, Etta whispered one evening to Carol, not pulling James forward, but holding him here. Carol nodded. He is not just guiding him home. She said, he is home. Thanksgiving came and went. James insisted on helping decorate the common room tree with old paper snowflakes and popcorn garland. He made one for Shadow, to a snowflake with a single ear folded down. He is better than a photo album, he told Carol one night. He remembers the parts I lost. You have remembered a lot this fall, she said gently, more than you have in years. He looked at her for a long moment, then reached out and held her hand. I remember you, he said. That is the best part. On the first Sunday of Advent, Shadow did not eat. He turned his nose away from kibble, lay down under the garden bench, and did not stir for hours. By sunset, his breathing had grown shallow. James sat beside him the whole time. Carol brought blankets and a hot drink, but he would not leave the dog's side. This is not the end, James said quietly. Carol wiped her eyes. He is just going back to the rest of the trail. She did not understand, but she stayed with him until the stars came out. When she woke from a short doze just after midnight, the dog was gone, and James was sitting alone, the snowflake ornament clutched in his hand. Part 4, The Wrong Way Home. James did not cry when Shadow disappeared the second time. He just sat there, quietly tracing the edges of the folded snowflake in his lap, as if by touch alone he could keep the dog's shape in his hands. Carol stayed close. She did not ask questions. She did not remind him that it was below freezing. She just wrapped a second blanket around his shoulders and settled onto the cold stone bench beside him. He had not spoken in nearly 2 hours. Finally, as frost gathered at the tips of the grass, James said, he left something behind. Carol looked up. A sign. James shook his head. A memory. The next morning, he insisted on walking the long path behind the chapel. It was a narrow trail, uneven and rutted, bordered by winter bare dogwoods and wind-rattled bird feeders. Residents rarely used it once the cold came in. But James seemed to know exactly where he was going. Carol followed a few steps behind, wrapped in her father's old coat, hands tucked in her sleeves. About halfway down the trail, James stopped. He knelt and brushed the dirt away from a small, half-buried stone. It was round and smooth, about the size of a biscuit, A child's name was scratched into it in faint red ink. Ruthie. Carol crouched beside him, breath visible in the cold. Is this a grave? James shook his head. She carved it after Mama died. Said she did not want to forget where she would cried the first time she understood what forever meant. He closed his eyes. She brought me here. I remember now. Gideon sat right there. She said, this is where I will leave my sadness, so it does not follow me forever. Carol touched the stone gently. Did it work? James smiled, faint and distant. Only until she left, back at Magnolia Glen. Something shifted. James no longer wandered, not in body, at least. But something inside him began to stir like a tide changing direction. Some days he was sharper than ever. Other days he sat in silence, staring out the window as if waiting for something just beyond the frame to reappear. He still carried the penny, still traced the ridges of Ruth's letter with a reverence Carol could not describe. He drew again, dozens of pages, all of them scenes from memory. One of Nadine in her wedding dress, holding a bouquet of Queen Anne's lace. One of Carol on her first bicycle, training wheels crooked. One of Ruth, hair in a ribbon, holding hands with a boy Carol did not recognize. But the most common sketch. Shadow, drawn again and again, from different angles. Sometimes walking. Sometimes waiting, sometimes leading James forward on a leash that looked more like a thread of light. One morning in late December, James knocked softly on the activities room door. Ita, surprised, looked up from a cart of board games. Wilder, can I help you? James smiled. I would like to teach a class, he said. Drawing, memory sketching. You think anyone show up? The bidder blinked, then beamed. I think they would line up. The class met every Tuesday morning. James called it memory in motion. Even if you can remember something until the pencil touches the page. He told the group that still counts, that especially counts. He had a dozen regulars by mid-January. One drew her childhood horse. Another sketched the kitchen wallpaper from her first apartment. One woman cried softly while tracing the outline of a boy's face. I never got to see him grow up, she whispered. But I remember this is little Cheen. James just nodded. Gently. Draw him as many times as you need. Then one Tuesday, Carol walked into the room and froze. James was drawing shadow again, but this time, the dog was standing on a porch, the same sagging porch of the house where James had grown up, the same porch where they would found him asleep that first time he disappeared. The house was rendered in meticulous detail. So was the sky, the fall leaves on the lawn, even the way the steps dipped to one side. But it was the boy on the porch that made her throat tighten. Small, maybe 7 years old, in overalls, holding out a hand toward the dog. Is that you? She asked softly. James did not look up. He just kept drawing. That is the day Gideon found me, he said. After Mama died, I went missing for hours. Everyone thought I ran away, but I was just trying to get to her grave. He paused. Gideon followed, stayed with me the whole time, even after it got dark. Carol's hands curled around the back of a chair. I thought I made it back home on my own. James continued. But now I remember he led me the whole way. I just did not know it. That night, Carol took the sketch and framed it. She hung it by the window in his room. James stared at it for a long time before bed. He never left. He whispered. Carol tucked the blanket higher around his chest. She said, "He just found a different way back." But winter was not finished, and neither was memory. On the final day of January, James stood at the entrance to the walking path, eyes scanning the horizon. "I heard him," he told Etta, "in the wind." Etta did not question it. She helped him into his coat and boots. He took his sketchbook and his gloves and whispered, "He is waiting for me." Part 5: The Wrong Way Home. The sky that morning was the color of steel. James Wilder stood at the edge of the walking path in his navy peacoat, wool cap pulled low over his ears, sketchbook clutched to his chest. His breath came in short, visible puffs. He looked both alert and far away, like a man who had just remembered something too big to carry alone. "I heard him," he said again. "Shadows out there." Etta buttoned the last clasp on his coat. "Where do you think he went?" "Wilder." James did not hesitate. "To the old train depot." Etta blinked. "The one they tore down years ago." James turned to her then, eyes sharp and clear. "The real one. The one still standing in my head." Carol drove them in her Subaru. She did not ask why. She did not try to explain that the train depot had been converted into a strip of townhomes in 2009. That the only thing left of the original building was a rusted signal post and a forgotten stretch of track swallowed up by weeds. James stared out the window as they passed the edges of Lexington, nodding as if each street corner said yes. "You remember me?" Shadow had always walked these edges. Carol had tracked the dog's roads after every disappearance. They always circled the same 3 anchors: the house where James grew up, the field near the broken fence line, and the hollow near the depot ruins. A triangle of memory. James called it his compass. When they parked beside the overgrown lot, James stepped out slowly, leaning on his cane. The air smelled of cedar and frozen earth. Carol watched as he walked toward the slope, where the old tracks vanished into a thicket of saplings. He moved with unusual certainty, as if he were retracing steps he had not taken in 70 years. Then he stopped and knelt. The sketchbook fell open beside him, its pages ruffling in the breeze. Carol approached quietly. James was staring at a shallow divot in the earth. "Here," he said. "This is where she put it." "Who?" "Ruth." He reached into the hollow and pulled out something small. Rusted. Round. An old dog tag? Carol took it gently from his hands. It was brass, scratched nearly smooth but just legible. Gideon 1951. James did not speak on the drive home. He held the tag in one hand, thumb gently circling its surface. Carol glanced over once and saw him smiling, not with joy. Exactly, but with a kind of quiet completion. Like someone who had finally remembered the beginning of a story he would spent decades trying to finish. That night, James could not sleep. He sat at his window, wrapped in a plaid wool blanket, watching the wind worry the branches outside. The framed sketch of Shadow and the boy on the porch hung behind him like a silent witness. Then, just after 3, he stood, walked to his desk, and began to write. Not draw. Write? In careful, shaky script, he filled a page. Then another. He did not stop until the sun began to rise. Carol found him asleep in the chair, pencil still in hand. She did not wake him. Instead, she picked up the top sheet of paper and read the words aloud in a whisper. To whoever finds this, If you have lost something, walk it back. Follow the path that tugs at your bones. The dog will meet you there. He remembers more than we do. And if you can find your way, he will bring the map in his eyes. James, Wilder. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the page to her chest. James began fading after that, not all at once. But the light that had come back into him with Shadow's presence began to dim. The clarity unraveled. Some mornings he did not recognize his room. Once, he asked Carol if she was his sister, and then cried when she told him the truth. Still, he walked. Every day, even without Shadow, he walked. He called it the dog's shift. I will walk it until he comes back to clock out. On the first full thaw of spring, the daffodils bloomed behind Magnolia Glen. James stood beneath the oak tree at the end of the walking path, his coat unzipped, the old dog tag hanging from a red ribbon around his neck. I think he is almost home, he told Carol. She wrapped her arms around him. Maybe you are too. James did not answer. He just looked into the distance, smiled faintly, and said, I hope he knows I remember him now. Part 6, The Wrong Way Home. Spring held on like a breath. The garden behind Magnolia Glen flushed green and gold. Tulips opened near the fountain. The crapple trees dropped pink petals like forgotten confetti. The world felt younger somehow except for James Wilder. James, at 78, had begun to retreat again. The spark that Shadow had stirred in him flickered. The names he had remembered, Nadine, Ruth, Carol, faded faster now. Some mornings, he called his daughter teacher. Other days, he did not speak at all. But he still walked, even when his knees ached, even when his balance swayed. He walked the same path Shadow once had, slowly, stubbornly. He called it keeping the trail warm. But I noticed something strange. James never got lost anymore. Before Shadow, he would wander out and forget the way back. But now, even with his memory fraying again, he always returned to the same bench in the east courtyard, the one where Shadow used to wait for him. As if the dog essence still lingered there. As if something unseen was still guiding his feet. Carol began writing down his sketches. Each time he remembered something new, even briefly, she would sit with him and ask him to draw it. A mailbox. A barber shop. A tire swing. A woman in saddle shoes with wind-blown hair. She labeled them with dates, places, names, just in case, she said quietly, for when the remembering stops. One day, James handed her a sketch of a boy and a girl on a dock. Their feet dangled over the water, and a dog lay between them, ears up, watching the lake. Carol blinked. Is that you and Ruth? James smiled. That is me and you. But Shadow put us there. He grew more poetic as he declined. Words came like riddles, drifting out of sleep and into daylight. He left the door open behind him. The stars are different when you are followed. Memory's not just in the mind, it is in the feet. Carol wrote every one down, even when they did not make sense. Especially then, one afternoon in late April, James vanished again. But this time, he did not take a coat. Did he bring his cane? Didn't he even wear shoes? They found him sitting in the mulch beneath the oak tree, hands buried in the earth like he was trying to dig his way into the past. Etta knelt beside him. Wilder, are you cold? He looked at her with the faintest flicker of recognition. I'm not cold, he said. Home? After that, Carol moved into a short-term guest suite on the second floor. She cooked him oatmeal in the mornings, played Johnny Cash after dinner. Some nights, they said nothing at all, just sat by the window, watching the wind through the budding trees. Once, he reached over and squeezed her hand. "You are the only one he stayed for," he said. "Who?" she asked. James just smiled and looked at the corner of the room like he saw someone standing there. On May 9th, he had a fall. It was not dramatic, no ambulance, no panic, just a slow collapse in the hallway, his knees giving way like sandbags losing shape. He did not cry out. He did not seem hurt. He just lay there, blinking at the ceiling. When Eta and Carol helped him up, he whispered, "He is at the end now. I am just a few steps behind." Carol kissed his forehead. "We will walk the rest together." James closed his eyes and nodded. That night, he slept for 14 hours. When he woke, he did not speak. He simply pointed to his red sketchbook, still resting on the nightstand. Carol opened it. Inside was a single, unfinished drawing, a man walking down a trail of light, with a dog just ahead of him. No leash, no need, just trust. At the bottom, 3 words were scrawled in his shaky script. "Wait for me. Part 7, The Wrong Way Home." The day after James fell, he did not get out of bed. He was not in pain, just quiet. A calmness had settled over him, like someone who had made peace with forgetting. He lay still, eyes open, watching light move across the ceiling like he was tracking something only he could see. Carol stayed at his side. She brought a folding chair close to the bed and held his hand, tracing the veins like roads on a faded map. His fingers twitched gently under hers. He had not spoken in almost 2 days. "You used to hum to me," she whispered, "right after Mom died. I remember it." He did not blink, but his mouth moved barely, a word she could not quite hear. So she hummed it for him, the old lullaby, "All the Pretty Little Horses." A tear slid down his temple. It had brought the sketchbook that afternoon. "Found it under his pillow," she said softly. Carol flipped to the last page. There, in pencil smudges, was a drawing of a fence with a gate slightly ajar. A man stood just beyond it. A dog waited on the other side, sitting upright, alert. Above the fence, words written in James's slanted hand. "He always knew which side I was on." Carol touched the page with trembling fingers. "I think he is saying goodbye." That evening, a breeze moved through James' room, even though the windows were closed. It carried the scent of honeysuckle, faint. Familiar? Impossible. Carol turned, startled. Ita looked up from the chair by the door. "You smell that?" she asked. Carol nodded slowly, and then James whispered, "Gideon." His eyes did not open. His voice was no louder than a falling leaf, but it was clear, certain. Carol leaned in. "Is he here?" "Dad." James smiled small, peaceful. He never left. That night, James slept with the old dog tag clutched in one hand, the red sketchbook in the other. Carol sat by his bedside, fingers laced with his, until her head nodded forward and she drifted off in the chair. Around 3 Etta came in to check his vitals. She paused in the doorway. James' chest rose once, then again slowly, gently, then no more. They buried him with the penny in his pocket. The dog tag looped around his neck, resting just over his heart. The sketchbook went to Carol. She kept it on her desk in a sunlit room that smelled of cedar and chamomile. She turned its pages like scripture slowly, reverently, each image a breadcrumb of a man who had once lost himself and found his way home. With help, with memory, with a dog who had waited at every turn. A week after the funeral, Carol walked the trail behind Magnolia Glen. It was warmer now, the last chill of spring fading. Robins darted through the canopy. She paused by the old oak bench, the one James always returned to, and she sat. She closed her eyes and listened. No voices, no footsteps, just wind. But then softly, almost imagined she felt it, a warm breath near her calf, a gentle brush of fur against her leg. When she opened her eyes, there was nothing there, nothing but a single paw print in the mud. Facing home. Part 8, The Wrong Way Home. Carol did not tell anyone about the paw print. She stood there for a long time, staring at it, one perfect print in the mud near the bench where her father always ended his walks. Deep, clear, facing the path back to Magnolia Glen. No other prints followed. No second, no third. Just one, like a memory pressing down hard enough to hold its shape. After James passed, the staff at Magnolia Glen planted a tree in his honor, a silver maple, just beyond the east courtyard where the sunlight caught in long stripes every afternoon. Carol picked the spot. He loved that light, she said it looked like the world remembering itself. They buried a small time capsule beneath it. Inside, a copy of the sketchbook, his bent wheat penny, and the drawing of the open gate with Shadow waiting beyond. They did not include the original dog tag. Carol kept that, threaded on a leather cord, resting just under her collarbone. In May, Carol began visiting more often, not just to remember but to be remembered. The staff let her sit in on art classes, help with lunch prep, read aloud in the library nook her father had once feared. She found herself sketching again too, something she had not done since childhood. One day she drew Shadow from memory. Strong legs, folded ear, watching the horizon. When she showed it to Etta, the nurse just smiled and said, "He never left, did he?" Carol shook her head. He just stopped needing to be seen. Residents began reporting dreams, not frightening ones, quiet ones. Comforting. One woman, Miss Alberta, said she dreamed she was walking in the woods with a dog who always stayed just ahead, looking back now and then to make sure she followed. "He took me to a kitchen," she said, "one I had not seen since I was a girl. I could smell cornbread in the oven." Another man dreamed of a porch swing. "I sat down next to the dog," he said, "and suddenly I could smell my father's pipe tobacco again." Carol listened, and every time she heard the stories, her eyes prickled. They were not just dreams. They were glimmers. One rainy Thursday, a volunteer brought in a new therapy dog, a rescue mutt, black and brindle, nervous around doors but gentle with laps. He had a split in one ear, and when he stepped through the front lobby, he paused, stared toward the far hallway, then walked, without prompting, straight to the east courtyard window, right where James used to sit. Carol rose slowly. Watching him, he looked at her once, tilted his head, then lay down at the foot of the bench and closed his eyes. They named him Gideon, not because they knew for sure, not because they needed it to be true, but because Some stories deserve to finish the way they started. Carol brought out her father a sketchbook that night. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside the dog, flipping through the pages. She stopped at the one with the two figures on the dock, the man and the girl, legs swinging over the lake, the dog between them. She traced the lines of the DOS body with one fingertip. "You brought him home," she whispered. "Now maybe. You brought me too." Gideon stirred, just enough to press his nose to her knee, then sighed and fell asleep again. Part 9. The Wrong Way Home. Summer crept in slow and golden. At Magnolia Glen, the air buzzed with cicadas, and the gardens pulsed with marigolds and snapdragons. The scent of honeysuckle hung thick in the air, just like the day James Wilder passed. Carol kept returning, not out of obligation, but out of gravity, like something unfinished still waited in the halls. Like memory had not quite finished its work on her. She found herself walking her father's old trails every morning, sometimes with Gideon, sometimes alone, but always with that familiar rhythm in her steps, slow, steady, as though she were retracing footprints that only her heart could see. Gideon was not like other therapy dogs. He did not do tricks, didn't respond to sit or stay, but he knew when to be there. He sat outside rooms before staff knew someone inside was struggling. He curled beside walkers and wheelchairs like he was guarding something invisible. And always, he returned to the bench beneath the maple tree, like he was still waiting for someone, or perhaps still guiding someone home. One morning, Carol sat beside him there, sketchbook in her lap. "Did you ever really leave?" she asked softly. Gideon did not look at her, but his tail thumped once against the grass. Carol smiled, did not think so. She began to draw. This time, it was the bench. Two figures on it, one old man, one dog, both facing away, both bathed in morning light. Above them, the branches reached out like arms. The sketchbook trembled slightly in her hands, not from sadness but from something gentler. Acceptance. That afternoon, she stopped by Etta's desk. "Would it be okay?" she asked. "If I started a class here?" Etta looked up from her paperwork. "A class?" "Memory sketching, same as my dad used to teach." Etta's eyes lit up. "Wilder would be loved that." Carol smiled. "I think he still does." The first class had only 4 people. Miss Alberta brought her dream journal and drew the cornbread kitchen. A quiet man named Leonard sketched the engine of a truck he would rebuild with his brother in 1956. Carol did not draw that day. She just watched their faces, the way their eyes narrowed in focus, the way their hands paused as memories caught up, the way every line seemed to tug something deeper to the surface. She remembered what her father once said, "Even if you can't remember until the pencil touches the page, that still counts, that especially counts." After class, Carol walked outside to find Gideon, but he was not at the bench, not under the tree, not at the fountain. She checked the garden paths, the side lawn, the north gate. Nothing. She felt that familiar twist in her stomach, the same fear from the day Shadow first vanished. Just as she turned back toward the main building, she saw him, standing at the far end of the east path. Looking back, waiting, Carol did not call out. She just followed. Her steps slowed. The wind shifted, And for the first time in years, she let herself remember not just the stories her father told, but the silences he never could, the moments they missed, the words he forgot, the pain they both carried. She carried it now without bitterness. Only weight. Only truth. At the end of the path, Gideon sat in a patch of sun. Carol reached him, knelt beside him, pressed her forehead to his. "You do not have to wait anymore," she whispered. He licked her wrist once, and lay down. The wind rose slightly, just enough to stir the maple leaves overhead. One fell, spun, landed beside her. Sketchbook. She picked it up, folded it into the last page, and wrote beneath it, "This is memory. Part 10, The Wrong Way Home." The final class of the summer met beneath the silver maple. Carol brought out folding chairs and baskets of soft pencils, thick paper, and lemon water in sweating glass pitchers. The air was warm, the kind that clung gently to the skin and made everything feel slower, softer. A dozen residents gathered, some in wheelchairs, some with oxygen tubes, all with stories written in the lines of their hands. Gideon lay at the center of the circle, eyes half-lidded, ears twitching now and then as if catching echoes too old for the rest of them to hear. Carol stood in front and opened her father's sketchbook. "This," she said, "was my dad's way of remembering, not by dates or names, but by feelings, by places, by the sound of a tree in spring or the smell of a pencil on paper." She paused, holding up the page with the open gate. And sometimes, by the ones who walked beside him, they drew in silence. Birdsong drifted down from the pines. A lawnmower hummed faintly across the street. Somewhere, someone was burning leaves. The air smelled like endings and beginnings. Miss Alberta drew her wedding ring. Leonard drew the curve of a baseball glove. One woman drew a pair of dog paws resting on her lap, saying softly, "I do not know if this really happened, or if I dreamed it." Carol smiled. Same thing. Sometimes. She did not draw until the others had finished. Then she picked up her pencil, and without looking down, began to sketch. A dog, walking down a narrow wooded path, their figures getting smaller as they moved into the light. She added no detail, no face, no features, just shape, just motion. Then, beside the figures, she drew a third shape, a girl. This time, walking after them, not trying to catch up, just walking because she could, because she knew the way. She signed it and tucked it between the pages of her father's sketchbook. That night, she sat on the bench beneath the tree, Gideon by her side, sketchbook in her lap. Fireflies floated through the dusk, blinking like thoughts she had not had in years. "I used to wonder," she said, "if he knew how much I loved him, even when he could not remember my name." Gideon lifted his head. Carol continued, voice barely a whisper, "But now I think, love is not something you forget. Even when your mind goes, it just moves somewhere else, into your hands, into your feet, into the dogs who walk beside you." She leaned down and kissed his fur. "You carried him farther than I ever could." That was the last summer the maple stood alone. By 4, Magnolia Glen had transformed the walking path into a memory trail. Residents painted stones with names and pictures. Benches bore brass plaques for Ruth, for Nadine, For James, at the trail's end, a small wooden post read, "If you are lost, walk with the dog." He remembers the way home, and beneath it, a paw print, pressed deep into the wood. Weathered, worn. Still waiting. The end.